Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another Supatease video. And in this one, I'm going to be going over the Kyrian Covenant, the Covenant of the Swolekins. There's a lot of buff owls with this covenant, so you're gonna feel pretty. You're gonna fit in pretty well as a balanced druid overall with this covenant. I'm going to be going over the class-specific spell and the covenant-specific spell that go along with the three talent trees and the options that follow, because this is going to be the biggest choice you make in Shadowlands is which covenant you want to go for. You want to make sure that you're picking the right one for you. And this one is a solid choice overall, I think, for PvE and PvP. There's some pretty strong bonuses for both in the talent trees. But going more into specifics, their ability, Kindred Spirits, is a little bit more difficult to use than the other class specific abilities that you'll be getting from the other covenants. This one is a little bit more, what do you want to say, high maintenance, but at the same time it could result in a high reward. So basically, I think this is going to be used on in 3 versus 3 arena, or in PvP you're going to use it on an ally who does damage. So I'll cast it on the Shadow Priest, and now every 1 minute I can connect with them and do increased damage, and they will take 30% of my damage every once in a while, and I'll take 30% of theirs. With the talent tree that I've gone, I also get 5% mastery. So it's sort of like a, if we go back to Cataclysm and you remember things like Dark Intent for Warlocks, where Warlocks would cast Dark Intent on an ally and then their damage over time effects were boosted. It's a similar idea. It's not like the Symbiosis. Some people were expecting that Symbiosis was coming back. This, in my mind, is not Symbiosis. It's much more closely related to maybe Power Infusion or Dark Intent than anything else. And I say that it's more high maintenance because it's a 1 minute cooldown. You're going to want to coordinate this with your ally. So when can they do damage as well as yourself? So it requires more than just yourself. I mean, you could just use it for yourself and say, who cares about my friends? Like, you could just activate it whenever it's going to benefit you the most. But overall, it might be better to synergize it with an ally. The next bonus that you get, which is not directly the bonus that you'll be using in combat, is that you can summon a steward. It's basically like a repair bot, but it's a moonkin, a little mini moonkin. So if you want a little mini moonkin that's going to come up to you and he's going to give you a potion that has 3 charges, he can repair your gear. And that's about, I mean, he's just your little buddy, right? Now, you're not going to be using him necessarily for combat benefits, right? He's just kind of there. But he gives you a Vial of Serenity, and the Vial of Serenity can be amplified by the talent trees that you choose from the Covenant. So as a baseline, I think it's just a 15% heal. And right now I'm talented to remove diseases, poisons, curses, and bleeds, which is a super good bonus. So you're going to get a little quick pick-me-up, and then you're going to get a buff that will likely buff your ally and yourself occasionally for more increased damage. So it's suited well defensively and offensively, in my mind, and it fits well for both aspects of the game, right? Both hands, the PvP and the PvE parts of the game. But that's just the class abilities. That's just the spec ability, or class ability and the covenant ability. So when we get more into the talent trees, that's where it will also be tested, and in terms of its viability for PvE and PvP. So Pelagos is going to be the first talent tree that's available to you, and when I first looked at it, before we get into specifics, this seemed like the one that you would go for if you were running dungeons raids. You could make it work in PvP for throughput, but when we get down to the little Swolkin guy down here, I think that I'm going to be kind of intriguing you to go after him instead. But right off the bat, you're going to get Let Go of the Past. This is very similar to older spells and passives that I've seen in the game, where you try not to cast a repeat ability. So you wouldn't just be move fire, move fire, move fire. You go move fire, sunfire, move fire, sunfire. It's very similar to hit combo for Windwalker monks, and I believe Moonkins had it. It was either in Legion or Battle for Azeroth, where you did this as well, and it would I think it was actually just shooting star, not shooting star, streaking stars, something like that. So this is not a new passive to the game. In this case, it's pretty minor. You're just going to get some versatility for 10 seconds, but versatility is your best stat in PvP, so why not? Just free 5% versatility. You're going to get a lot of damage from the class-specific ability. For the Kindred Spirits, you're going to get a heal from the Vial. It's pretty solid all around. You're going to go into your conduits, which are still not yet available. And I'll be doing a conduit video when they do become available. I plan on doing a legendary video as well. In this, we're just looking at the covenants, right? Just the skeleton of the covenants, the sort of the base of your decision. And then we'll go into more of the specifics of how you'd want to build your balanced druid when that information becomes available. Now, you can spec here into Vial of Patience, so Vial of Serenity heals you for an additional 35% health, but it's a heal over time effect, so you're not going to get that boom, big heal, but it basically turns it into Crimson Vial for rogues, so you're just going to get this kind of buffed up heal. Pretty good for 1v1s, duels, maybe if your healer's kind of slacking. Again, in PvE, it's always tough because PvE generally just comes down to how much damage can you output. Do you output the most damage and you can avoid dying to one-shot mechanics, you're the best, right? So it's tough in PvE to disseminate how much value you will get out of this. You may get some, but it's tough to say because it's just requiring more attention outside of your damage rotation. But on the other hand, focusing Mantra, defeating an enemy lowers the cooldown of your Vial of Serenity. In PvP, you're not really defeating enemies very often. Out in the world, you are. In Battlegrounds, you are. In dungeons, you are. In raids, not so much, at least not where it matters, which is the boss fights. So this is not getting too much value. I think that this tier is likely picked based on whichever conduits end up being the best when they're available. So if finesse conduits are insane, you're going to be having to go for Vial of Patience because your finesse conduit leads into that. If potency conduits end up being the best, then you'll have to lead into this one, even though it doesn't seem that well suited for combat, unlike this one, which is a little bit better suited for combat. So we've got more conduits which aren't available. We go down to the second tier. Defeating an enemy reduces the cooldown on your steward's non-vial services, so he can repair, he can do a bunch of other stuff, a little bit of quality of life. Defeating an enemy grants you 10% movement speed. This effect is increased if defeating a powerful enemy. Not really specific as to how much extra movement speed you get for a powerful enemy there, and is a player considered a powerful enemy? Probably not, so you're looking only at 10% movement speed. Walk together. Pelagos periodically sends you crafting materials, so again, a little bit of a benefit for your resources, right? So this is just in general crafting materials though, and it does come from all content: dungeons, raids, battlegrounds, and arena, and quests. So this is quality of life. But when it comes to quality of life, if you're a player who cares about performance, you're going to look up to the conduits that are above them, and whichever conduit ends up being the best is likely going to make the decision of your quality of life for you. So don't worry too much about this. It's going to be much more determined by the conduits, which I will be making in a future video, literally as soon as they're available. And then on the final tier, this is where I was getting my 5% mastery from my class-specific Covenant ability. So Combat Meditation. Kindred Spirits increases your mastery by 5% for 10 seconds. It's kind of similar to the Night Fae one. If you watched my Night Fae video, which if you haven't, check it out. If you want to make sure that you don't want to go after Night Fae, they get 10% mastery when they activate their class-specific ability, but it's a 2-minute cooldown. So this is effectively the same thing, but it's half the value of that because it's half the cooldown. So it was just kind of cut down, but it's still just some nice damage increase. And what I'm imagining is you'll see little like blue things maybe on the ground, and you can go pick them up and you get an extra 3 seconds of it if you can pick it up. That's usually difficult to execute on and generally not worth it in PvE or PvP because you'll compromise your positioning, you lose out on damage, or you end up taking more damage to try and pick them up. These types of spells and effects have to be really powerful to make you reposition to get them, because you're already taking the loss of moving, and you're not doing damage when you're moving, or you're not healing, you're not helping, and maybe you're moving to a bad spot. So there's a lot to sacrifice. So I don't imagine that the moving into it will be too much benefit. But overall, you just get some versatility, you get some mastery, you get a slight healing increase. Pelagos is pretty solid all around. I feel like you could use that in all content of the game and be okay. Moving into the next talent tree, we've got Kleia, and I apologize if I've pronounced any of these names wrong. This talent tree, on the other hand, also benefits your vial a bit, and this is the one that makes it remove curses, diseases, poisons, and bleed effects. So Generally, if you don't like feral druids, you don't like assassination rogues, even shadow priests to an extent, because devouring plague is returning to shadow priests. Warlocks are getting a lot of curses, but you can already dispel curses, so it's not a lot of value on that, but still maybe saves you a global cooldown. So if you're struggling with those classes, this talent tree will allow you to benefit and basically just smash them. You can just remove all their bleed effects, set them behind. You've got 3 charges of it, so you can remove it 3 times in a game in arena. It's pretty solid. In PvE, again, it's probably just more of an inconvenience. You lose out on damage to do something that your healer's probably supposed to do, am I right? So not a great benefit there. Mentorship, while above 90% health, you increase nearby party members' maximum health by 5%. Now, as a balanced druid, you're generally not wanting to stand next to many people. I mean, in raid, okay, in a raid, I could see this getting a little bit of value, right? If you're standing in the ranged group and you're buffing everybody by 5%, you get a little bit of an extra buffer, but you're going to quickly go below 90% health usually if there's any sort of AoE mechanics on the boss. It's not a lot of benefit in PvP because it's very difficult to stay above 90% health in a lot of cases, and you're not supposed to generally be standing next to anyone. So if you're making this choice, it's likely Ascendance Vial for PvP, Mentorship for Raid, and possibly Dungeons, just to give them a little bit of an extra buffer room. Unless there's a dungeon that, you know, your specific group, let's say, has a healer that can't remove diseases. Let's say your group can't remove diseases, and there's a disease that needs to be removed. This one would be a good pickup, but I will know the information more when all that kind of stuff is finalized. Moving on down, you've got your conduit choices, and we move to the second part of the Covenant tree, the resonant accolades. When receiving healing or healing an ally, 5% of the healing is repeated on the target over 15 seconds. So it's a little bit of an extra hot on yourself whenever your healer's healing you. You can make it easier on them, but again, it doesn't do any damage. I mean, I'm a balanced druid. It doesn't do any damage. So it's not really that intriguing, I think, for a balanced druid player in PvP or PvE. And I mean, you heal other people, but you don't heal them very much. You don't have Convoke the Spirits. Maybe you go for a big Heart of the Wild Swiftmen, and you get a bit of extra healing. So you could make this like a dueling build for Balanced Druid, where you can remove bleeds to beat classes that might give you a difficult time, like Rogues and Feral Druids, and then you can get some extra healing. I would believe this would also come from... Well, no, the way that this is worded, when receiving healing or healing an ally, does that include you healing yourself? If it does, then your vial would also trigger this and heal for an extra 5%. So you could get a lot of self-sustainability, which is what makes a class usually strong in duels, is its ability to just not die. So you could maybe make your Balanced Druid a really good dueler with the combination of traits that are available from Kleia. But in PvE and ranked PvP, it's likely not that strong. Barrier's Pursuit, your damaging spells and abilities have a chance to decrease the target's movement speed by 30% for 20 seconds. Now, this is similar to what we saw from the Nightfate Covenant. They had some snares, but I don't think they lasted as long. 30% is pretty strong, and that's a major weakness for the Balanced Druid in PvP, where slows matter a lot, is that you don't have them. And you're generally, if you want to play with an Affliction Warlock, like I would want to try out, because Affliction Warlock's got a rework, and that was one of the most fun comps I've had playing in the history of the game, is with Affliction Warlock Balanced Druid. This will give your team a consistent slow. So this could be a solid pickup for you overall, if that's your intention, is to play with a class that doesn't have a consistent slow. Now we move over to Pointed Courage. Critical strike is increased by 1% for every nearby enemy or ally up to 5%. It's kind of weird. It's making you want to stand in melee range, because crit is valuable for Balanced Druid in PvE, but you generally don't want to stand in the melee group. I suppose you could stand in the ranged group, but in a dungeon, how many ranged are there going to be? What if you're the only one? It would just be your healer. You get 1% crit. Or you'd have to run into all the mobs and risk dealing with their cleave effects and moving out of it. Seems a little difficult to execute on in PvE. Now in PvP, you probably are going to be the target, so there's always going to be an enemy nearby. You get a little bit of extra crit, but crit is less valuable in PvP. So to me, in PvP, I think the obvious choice is to get the slow. so that you have an easier job chasing people down or preventing them from connecting onto you. Or healing if it does feel like healing is falling behind. We haven't got to the tuning phase yet for PvP, so we don't know if healing is going to be more valuable than utility, but it could. So just keep that in mind when you're going through this talent tree. Cleansing Rites, after 5 seconds out of combat, gain a shield for 10% of your health lasting for 30 seconds. So at the start of the game, you'll just get a 10% shield. Unless you're actively trying to get out of combat for 10% of your health. I suppose, again, you could maybe make this for dueling, where you start the duel with a 10% shield, you get extra healing on your vial, you can root a target that you're dueling, try and run away, re-stealth, and get the shield to refresh. You could maybe make it for duels if that's what you're interested in. Now in dungeons, this looks good because after every pull, you're just going to get a 10% shield, soak up some damage for the team, and it's not a hindrance on your damage because it just happens on its own. Ever forward, while above 90% health, your mounted movement speed is increased by 10%. So this is like maybe World Quest, stuff like that. Battleground. You're generally starting to fight in stealth as a druid, so moving 10% faster in PvP formats, and most of the time you can't mount in the dungeon. It's not that great. It would make sense that you would go for Cleansing Rites in this specific choice for a balanced druid. But again, the conduits below them, because if you pick Cleansing Rites, you have to go to a finesse conduit. This means that the finesse conduit is absolutely the best. Well, you're going to go that way. You kind of wanted to go that way, but if an endurance conduit ends up being the best, you're going to have to give up the 10% shield for something that you don't really care about to get the endurance conduit. This is kind of the downside of the way that they've made these trees, is that there might be some cool effects or cool utilities that you want to go after, but if the conduits end up being sort of the beef, the meat that you want to get for your character, you are likely going to just be ignoring the traits, or forced to be ignoring the traits to go after those conduit slots. So it's a little bit unfortunate losing some of that kind of flavor of the Covenant if that happens. But anyways, moving down here, we got the last part of Kleia's talent tree, the Valiant Strikes. You and your nearby allies' critical strikes grant you stacks of Valiant Strikes up to 40. And at 40 stacks, you heal nearby allies for 5% of their maximum health. Why does it gotta be heal? Why can't it be deal damage too? You heal nearby allies and deal damage to enemies for 5% of their maximum health. I suppose that's a lot of health on a boss. That's probably why they didn't do damage, because it's percent based. But again, I could see this as a dueling build, right? It's more healing for yourself. If you manage to get to 40 stacks in a duel, which could be really hard, and you're only going to get a 5% heal over 10 seconds too. It's not even all at once. It seems a little bit awkward, not super like, wow, I'm excited to get that as a balanced druid. As a resto druid in a raid, okay, that's pretty crazy, right? Like, you're just going to get 40 stacks. If all of your allies are critting, I mean, this seems pretty good. You could even pair it up with some crit builds and try and go after that. This one, Kleia, it's a little bit hard. It's a little bit hard selling point. I mean, you get the slow, you get disease dispels. I'd say it's a good pick, but it doesn't immediately stand out to me. And now finally, the one that does stand out to me, of course, is our little Swolkin here. If they make a glyph that lets me look like that, that will make me very happy. That's all I want. I would pick Kyrian if it gives me access to a glyph that lets me look like a Swolkin. I mean, come on, please. That's all I want. We got Forgelite Prime Mikanikos. So this guy is the one that's pretty nutty for PvP overall. So on the top tier, our Vial Serenity will also knock enemies away from you. Do note that balanced druids have Typhoon coming back baseline, which is a knockback, and they have Ursul's Vortex, which is kind of a tornado. It sucks people in, but they are on diminishing return with knockback effects. So you already have 2 knockback diminishing returns. Adding a third one might not be the best choice. Do you really need 3 knockbacks, right? Or you could get Forgelite Filter. When reduced below 35%, your Vial Serenity automatically heals you and consumes a charge. So again, it's almost like they're kind of stealing some of the Windwalker passes. I mean, that's healing elixirs, right? It's just a vial instead of an elixir. And this effect looked like hit combo from Windwalkers. So it's not like, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of originality in this Covenant, but I mean, it's still a powerful effect, right? In player versus player combat, abilities like this, when you dip low on health, you heal or gain a shield, are generally the best types of spells. You don't have to think about it. It automatically happens and it saves you. It's cheat death, right? These types of effects are also strong in dungeons, although usually you want it to be complete immunity to death. But in PvP, there's nothing that completely KOs you, so these end up being very powerful. It seems a lot better than a knock, right? Moving on to the second tier, Hammer of Genesis. Damaging a new enemy grants you 2% haste for 10 seconds, up to 5 stacks. I could see getting some value out of this attacking pet classes that summon in new pets, right? So Unholy Death Knights on the Apocalypse, they summon in new ghouls consistently, and if you're just dotting up those ghouls every once in a while, I mean, you're buff. They're trying to do increased damage, and then no, that's mine. 10% haste. So it could be good in terms of damage there. This seems very good for dungeons, where if you're going pull to pull to pull, you pull 5 mobs, boom, 10% haste. I mean, that seems very good overall. And then moving over here, we've got Sparkling Driftlight Globe Core. When you're reduced by 30 to below 35% health, stun nearby enemies for 3 seconds. This effect may only occur once every 5 minutes. 5 minutes? 3 second stun? 5 minutes? The thing is, with Balanced Druid, Bash got nerfed. It's only a 4-second stun on a 1-minute cooldown, and they put Heart of the Wild on that tier, so I'm not sure if we're even going to be playing around with stuns anymore, or even have access to a stun. So this would give you that if you were playing with a class that doesn't have it. Generally, this is not relevant in PvE. I mean, usually the mobs that you would want to stun are immune to stun, and you're not near them. So I don't see any use in PvE. In PvP, 5-minute cooldown seems really extreme for a 3-second stun. Is the stun undispellable? That's yet to be seen, but it's kind of yikes as a 5-minute cooldown. Soul Steel Clamps. Now this is the one this is the one that you're like, how does this not have a longer cooldown? After 5 seconds of standing still, so you gotta stand still. You're already gonna maybe try and be casting some spells, or you're trying to premeditate a stun. Incoming stuns and incapacitate durations are reduced by 30%. Lasts for 5 seconds, and for once you start moving. So Boomkin is going to be casting a lot more, which means you'll be standing still. So you can just annoy people who want to stun you. And being stunned as a Boomkin is already very annoying. So this is just giving you basically 30% stun reduction. I'm not sure how valuable the incapacitate effect is really going to be. A Ring of Frost is incapacitate, so if this triggers before a Ring of Frost is landed on you, you'd get 30% off of that. A Sap would be 30% less as well if you're standing still in stealth. So it's a little bit of value there, but obviously the stun is the main focus of this. It seems to me that you would want to go for Soul Steel Clamps if you're in PvP, but if you're in PvE, you'd want to be going for Hammer of Genesis. We've got more conduits moving down to the next tier. Regenerating materials. Casting or receiving healing is a chance to improve. This is looking like quality of life, right? Resilient Plumage, fall damage decreased by 20%, and after falling, damage you're taken is reduced by 30%, 0% for 30 seconds. So it's just, you've already got ways to avoid fall damage, right? It's not a super big deal here. I kind of wish that they designed the Covenant talents the way that this one is at the end. So you see that this is a quality of life choice, right? So I'm just picking, do I want to take less fall damage? Do I want a little bit of less repair bill, right? And you're not forced to pick either one because of a conduit right below it. I like the utility being below the conduit. So this one conduit goes into this, and then it's my choice. I'm not missing out on performance to make a choice of something that's just fun, right? I like the way that this works towards the end of it much more than something like this, where it's you have to pick the conduit and then move into the quality of life. Or potentially just open the path so that all these conduits lead to any choice. You can pick the quality of life. It seems like that would be a more enjoyable experience, at least for me personally, just a point of critique so far from my observations of the talent trees and the covenants. But we've got one more final one. Bronze Call to Action. After using 120 spells, And abilities, your next spell or ability summons Brawn, who attacks and heals your targets. I went to a training dummy, and I casted 120 spells. Brawn is not nearly as impressive as you would think for 120 spells. It is just some extra damage, and there already are great benefits, like having stun reduction and having an automatic healing effect. So just having him even as a mediocre amount of damage is nice. To me, this talent tree, it's kind of your ranked PvP talent tree. That's what you're going to be wanting to go for. If you're doing random battlegrounds, or you're dueling, or you're solo, then Kleia is probably going to be your pick more often than not. And then Pelagos could be your dungeons, right? Your dungeons and your raids. You get mastery, you get versatility. It's a lot more throughput in that regard. So all three kind of have a place to switch between them, but it costs resources as well. Remember that. So we don't know how long it will take to get a reservoir anima to reset these talent trees, or how far it's going to put you behind because you dedicate a conduit to a slot. So switching these could be very difficult, and you want to make sure you're making the right choice, right? What do you ultimately care about at the end of the day? And if it's pushing Radiant Arena, then my suggestion would be Forgelite Prime Mikanikos. If you have fun in battlegrounds, you like dueling, then Kleia. And if your main focus is dungeons and raids, you want the maximum performance, then Pelagos makes the most sense. So that's going to be it for my Kyrian review in Shadowlands. I hope that this helps you sort of make your own choice. Of course, make your own choice at the end of the day. I'm just here to try and help out, give you some information as I get it, and I hope that it helps you out. I'll be making a video about which covenant I'm going to be going for specifically in the future. At this time, I still haven't completely decided, but now we've got all the information out on the table. We can filter through and pick what we want, right? So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.